Lisa J. McLean here with part 2 for hiring new clinicians. In part 1, we talked about posting a job ad as well as going through the first interview that you might have with somebody. In this video, I'm going to talk more about the second interview as well as what happens beyond. During the second interview, I'd like to have the potential candidate do a case conceptualization. It's not as deep as it sounds, it really isn't. It's just something a little bit more general to give me an idea of how they might work with a potential client. Because the truth of the matter is, most likely you won't be sitting in on the sessions when they're first starting. So it just gives you an idea of how they might sound as they're talking to a client. Because even if you read their notes, you still won't get that full, all-encompassing feeling of what it's like to be sitting with them as a client. So typically I let them know during the first or after the first interview that the next step in the process, if I invite them for the second interview, will be a case conceptualization. I let them know that it's more of a general way of them taking me through how they might work with a client. During the second interview, I have prepared ahead of time, and looking back over the first interview, I have a pretty good idea of the type of population that they work with, including maybe age as well as presenting issues. I will make up a client based off of that. So if they work with the adult population that have anxiety, so I will base that potential client, or I should say base that the fake client for our purposes, I'll base that on what they typically will see. So what will happen is I will give them, set up the scenario, and I'll have them kind of walk me through their intake process with this client. So as they're talking, it's more of a live interaction between me and them. It's not necessarily a role play, but it's more of a interactive dialogue that I'm having with them to have them really walk me through that process. And if more information is needed about a client, then I'll provide more information just based on the types of clients that they might typically work with. So how that will look, again, I'll say, this is a client in their 20s, just a female client in her 20s, saying that she's coming in because she's been having a lot of panicky symptoms while she's in school. She's in college. She lives at home with her mom. So I'll give some identifying information, and then I'll say, so she's coming in for the intake. What are some additional questions that you might ask her? So this really helps me to get more of an understanding of their assessment skills. What are some of those pertinent questions that they will ask based off of the presenting issue that's coming in. So by the time they get to the end of that, I ask them, so what is your initial diagnosis? What is your provisional diagnosis? Because, of course, sometimes we're not giving a full diagnosis the first time that we meet a person. We might need to gather more information. So I will ask, what is a provisional diagnosis at this time? So they give me the diagnosis, and then I ask them, so based off of this intake assessment that you have, the diagnosis that you have, what is a potential treatment plan? Because I want to know, how do therapists go about creating a treatment plan? Of course, this is nothing detailed, like I said before, but it still gives me an idea if this therapist typically is able to make their goals and objectives measurable, and just kind of gives me an idea if they're on track in terms of what the presenting issue is, the diagnosis, and having an appropriate treatment plan that goes along with it. So again, nothing too deep, serious. It's more for me to get a general idea of how they might go about doing their treatment plan. So I will ask them, so what is the treatment plan based off of the information that you gave me? So then moving on, I will ask, so what would be what is this course of treatment that's happening? What are some ways that you will be able to know kind of how your client is doing? And by that question, I'm really hoping to get, I'm going to do a GAD assessment to really measure where their anxiety is so I can really track it throughout my sessions with them to know when it's time to discharge. So it gives me an idea if they're using assessment measures or tools with the client. I ask, as far as the treatment goes, of course, with the treatment plan, I'll know what they're going to be doing. Are they using evidence-based treatment, with the client as they're working with the client? So I will ask, if you end up coming up into or facing a barrier or noticing a challenge with this client, how are you going to handle that? How will you get past that? For example, let's say that you gave the client some homework to do in between session. Your client comes back and they haven't done anything in between session. How do you handle that? So I want to get an idea of what might they be like in session when they are dealing with a client that might be a little bit either resistant or ambivalent towards treatment. Okay. So then as we're moving through, I will ask, at what point do you feel that this client might be ready to discharge? Because we don't want to keep clients in therapy forever. So we really want to have an idea of what is it that we're looking for when a client is ready to leave treatment, when they've met their goals. So I'll ask them that. Sometimes they might say, according to an assessment measure that I gave, depending on what the scores are compared to when they first came in and just kind of over time, how are they doing in their different life domains? Has it improved? Are they using the coping strategies, the treatment tools that I've been given them? So I just really find out, how does this therapist assess when it's time to get ready for discharge? Then after that, I'll say, okay, so you've established with your client that it's time to start working towards discharge. So I will say, how do you start preparing for your client for discharge? I just want to see how they go through that process, because it's a therapeutic relationship that is developed, and it's not one that's just typically cut off. Typically it's planned because we want to really model an appropriate way for closure. So I'll find out from them how they prepare the client, and then I'll ask them, so now is the day of discharge. So what are some things that you do during that final session with your client? All of this gives me just more of an idea of how this potential candidate might interact with the clients. Because again, if you're bringing someone into your practice, especially if they're a W-2 employee where you have more control over, what they're doing and how they're operating, then you want to make sure that they're operating according to your practice's standards and mission. And so this will give you an idea of how they operate. And if you really like this potential candidate, and even if they don't really operate in the way that your practice does, you might feel that there's an area for growth to where you are able to kind of shape them and teach them, how to really work with the client according to the standards of your practice. That's the second interview that I will typically do, me and my team do, with a potential candidate, to just really be able to get more of an idea of who they are and how they operate with treatment. The next step, the beyond the second interview part, is that once the second interview has been completed and they seem like a great candidate, a great fit with the practice, then it's time to offer them a position. Typically, at the second interview will be a time where I will allow them to ask further questions. I'll give more details about the nature of the position as well. When it comes time to make an offer, I will give them a call. Now, you can always send them an email, but I think it's more for personal touch when you actually pick up the phone and give them a call. When I give the potential candidate a call, I will let them know that their area of expertise is a great fit with the practice, and that the skills that they exhibit really fall in line with the practice and the type of candidate that we're looking for. And we would like to offer you a position here at the practice. I will let them know that I'm going to give them a couple of days to think about it and to get back to me. Sometimes you might have somebody that's enthusiastic and says, yes, I'll accept your offer. Other times you might have people that want to think on it. And then depending on what the offer is compared to what it is that they're looking for, they may come back to you and try to negotiate some things that are a part of your offer. But at that time, you can already have in mind what your maximums are as far as maybe the fee or salary, the benefits, Or if you haven't thought that through, you can say, okay, I'll take this into consideration and I'll get back to you. You don't have to always answer right on the spot. You can always get back to that person. Once they say yes, they've accepted the position, whatever payroll system you happen to use, you start getting them onboarded. The onboarding process might include getting them onboarded with your payroll system so that they can start getting paid once they start working with you. If you have them completing any types of trainings, maybe have them start completing those trainings. Before you even do that, you want to make sure you get the background checks done, the reference checks. And once those are all good and you're moving forward, one of the next steps, if you are insurance based or accept any insurances and you want to get them paneled, you want to start that credentialing process as well. Once the offer letter is signed and the background reference checks are all good, that's typically next steps to get that done. You want to set up your orientation for when you're going to orient them to the practice as well. So that, again, especially if you're using W-2 employees, making sure everybody is following the same order and structure so that things are consistent throughout your practice. That is the second interview and going beyond that second interview. I hope this was helpful for you. And again, I have a new hire checklist that you can check out in the comments. There will be a link that you can click on so that you can get to that free checklist to help kind of guide you through the process. I encourage you to keep on putting one foot in front of the other because building a successful therapy practice is not always easy. It is going to be work, but it can be done. Bye.